Hello friends, hi, hello, welcome! My name is August and this is my April wrap-up. All the books that I read in the month of April. If you saw my April TBR video, you might know that in the month of April, it was my birthday month, and I do this fun thing where I actually pick out the books that I've been wanting to read the most. This makes my birthday month really special to me because then I can hand pick and select the books I've been looking forward to reading the most. Since this year in 2021, I've been using a lot of random generators to pick my TBR for me, so I felt a lot of sense of freedom, and I was able to read a grand total of 13 books in the month of April, which is quite a bit. That's a lot of books. Without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump right in. I'm not going to share statistics this month. Let me know if that bothers you. Let me know if you actually like statistics, but just let me know if that's something you're interested in knowing more about. The first book that I read was Fearing the Black Body: The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia by Sabrina Strings. This is an incredibly dense, nonfiction, research-heavy book. I think it took me about 2 months to finish, and I listened to it over on Libby, so it was an audiobook, and it took me 5 ever. While I so was in awe of how incredibly smart and research-focused and detailed Sabrina Strings is as an author and a researcher and just like an intellectual person, a very highly intellectual person, the writing was like really extremely factual. A lot of it went over my head, but I think this is an incredible piece of work, an incredible text. I think more people should be reading it and talking about it, even if we're only able to gain like 1% of the knowledge that Sabrina Strings includes and incorporated in this book. I just felt like I was not smart enough to understand it, and I also think that was the downfall of listening to this book on audio versus reading it with my eyes. I think reading it with my eyes would have been a lot easier because I would have been able to highlight and take notes and, you know, just tactily have it in my hands. But overall, this book was incredibly informative, important, and I really enjoyed it, and I would definitely recommend it. But since it is a nonfiction and it was very like research heavy and it's just here are the facts, I decided not to give this book a rating, but it was incredible and I do recommend it. The first physical book that I read in the month of April, this was a 5-star for me, was Sputnik Sweetheart by Haruki Murakami. This is the second Murakami book that I've read and I loved it. This was worth the like 5+ years it took for me to actually get my hands on a copy of this. Oh my gosh, it is so good. It's so incredible. I loved it. 5 stars all around. This had like everything that I love in a book. It had beautiful language. It had really interesting, quirky, fun characters. It had like this really creepy, metaphysical, paranormal horror element to it that really freaked me out. You have a mystery, you have gorgeous landscape and scenery, and then you have some really interesting character development. In this book, basically, we are hearing from this young man named Kay's perspective, and he has been in love with one of his best friends, Sumir. But Sumir is in love with a woman who is 17 years older than her, and it talks about Sumir's love for this older woman. This older woman is married to a man, their interesting relationship, and Kay is this outsider who's narrating their relationship. He's not directly involved and can see things for himself, but he is from this outside perspective talking about it, which there's something about that writing style that I just really, really love when we're not able to physically or even emotionally get into the heads of the people that we're following, but it's told from somebody who's really close to one of them. Like, it's a story. So you automatically feel like, can I trust this narrator? How accurate are these events that happened? This gave me the heebie-jeebies at one point. And there is a bigger mystery that happens that's definitely not a spoiler or anything, but Sumir goes missing after working with this woman that she is in love with. She goes missing while on a work trip, and Kay takes it upon himself to go and try and figure out what happened to her and find out where she went. So that is definitely not a spoiler. That is on the back of this book, but the freaky part, if you've read this book, it's the Ferris wheel scene. It was one of those freaky scenes that got like freakier and freakier as time went on, and as the story unraveled, I was like, what? And I was like, what? And I was like, what? So good. It gave me the freaks. I loved it so much. This was so good. My only complaint was I think the book could have ended a lot sooner. It's not a thick book at all. It was really easy to read. I flew through it. I feel like it would have had a bigger impact on me just because I really didn't like where it necessarily ended. But other than that, I really love this book. 5 out of 5. I really recommend it. The next book was one that I was like super duper excited to read in the month of April, and that is Creatures by Crissy Van Meter. Oh my gosh, this book broke me. It made me tear up, and it's very rare that a book is able to make me feel emotion that deeply, especially sadness. So the fact that my eyes got watery and I teared up is really big for me. But this is so beautifully written. We are reading from this young woman named Evie's perspective as she grows up on this island called Winter Island, which is off the coast of California. Her mother has been absent her whole life, basically, and her father is an alcoholic. There are definitely a lot of trigger warnings in this around addiction specifically. Her father is really unable to take care of her on his own, so they're homeless a lot. They're on this island. He grows and sells weed for a living. And it just talks about this gorgeous landscape of living on an island, being surrounded by all of this marine wildlife, and just living this really dysfunctional childhood. So it bounces between her growing up as a young girl to where she is now. As she is older on Winter Island, she's getting ready to get married, and on the day that she's supposed to get married to a sailor, he is missing at sea. At the same time, a dead whale has beached on the shore. And there's just a lot of beautiful sections in here of prose, of just like talking about the similes and metaphors and analogies and connections between aquatic marine life and us as humans and our souls and how we connect with other people and our relationships with them. Evie's relationship with her father made me cry. That is what made me cry. It was really emotional. It just talks about the recklessness of childhood and teenage years, getting into trouble, partying, growing up, figuring out what home really is to you. 5 out of 5. It was so beautifully written. It was so gorgeous. I just had such an amazing time reading this. It felt like I was reading poetry, but it was intriguing narrative at the same time. Like I never felt bored while reading it. I really loved it. I really loved this book. So that is Creatures. Okay, this next book I actually read over on my Kindle, and I liked it so much. I wasn't even finished reading it before I went on and found a copy of it on Thrift Books, because I was like, I haven't even finished this book, but I know I really want a copy of it because what the hell. This has to be one of the weirdest uncomfy books I've ever read, and that is The Job of the Wasp by Colin Winnette. I don't even remember how I found this book. I think after reading Sputnik Sweetheart and Creatures, which are both like very emotional, unique literary fiction books, I was like, I kind of just want to sit back and enjoy a horror. So I think this was under the horror category on Libby. And what? This book is like if Lord of the Flies mixed with Sixth Sense, the movie, mixed with Wilder Girls had a baby. This would be The Job of the Wasp. I still find myself just thinking about it after I finish it, where I'm just like, oh dude, remember that scene? Like to myself, I'm like, oh my god, do you remember when that happened? Because that was nuts. So basically in this book we're following our unnamed protagonist whose perspective we are reading from, and he is an orphan, and he is at this orphanage for orphaned boys. And so it has a little bit of a feeling of kind of like dark academia because they also go to school at this orphanage. So our main character, already from kind of like page 1, you're like, do I trust you? He felt like such an unreliable narrator, and I was like, dude, either you are kind of a little bit of an intentional a-hole and you're a jerk and I shouldn't be rooting for you, or at times you felt really bad for him because he doesn't fit in anywhere in this orphanage. Like, kids aren't very nice to him, so it just makes you question, like, are kids just mean to him for no reason, or has he really been mean to them in the past because they're claiming that he's really not this nice guy? More things start to unravel as you become aware of like what our main character is able to do versus what he's not able to do, and it just really makes you think that there's so much more going on behind the scenes than what the author is even giving you, than what the narrator is giving you. Basically, a string of murders start to happen at this orphanage. Somehow our main character, our protagonist, is framed for these murders. I don't know how to explain this, but like he is able to like rationalize everything and analyze everything in his mind of like, oh, that's why this happened because this, and this. But then he'd get a new piece of information and be like, so really it was this. So the entire book he's like creating the red herrings in his own mind. I don't know how to explain it. This was just such a psychological trip, and I really, really loved that. After the murders start happening, the rest of the boys in the orphanage are convinced that our main character is a ghost, and they are trying to prove it in a lot of different ways. There was just a lot of symbolism and metaphors in here that I feel like kind of went a little over my head, but I think just the emotional grittiness and psychological like horror in this book was so well done. I loved reading from our narrator's perspective because it was just so unique. I think it was just a really strange, bizarre way of telling a story. It was really weird. All in all, this was truly bizarre, truly weird. Lord of the Flies mixed with like gothic academic grossness. I really liked it, and I would love to recommend this to more readers and to have more people read it and hear other people's thoughts about it, because it was truly a very unique read. So that is The Job of the Wasp. The next book I listened to over on Libby as an audiobook, and that was Meaty by Samantha Irby. This is the first Samantha Irby book I've ever read from, and wow. I really, really enjoyed her writing. I thought it was funny, it was snarky, it was raunchy. Basically, Samantha Irby is this really talented, wonderful essayist, and she talks very openly and very candidly about her chronic disease of having irritable bowel syndrome. She talks openly about her sex life. She talks openly about what it's like to be a black fat woman, what it's like to really kind of like struggle in society at her age. She talks about her childhood trauma. It was such an eclectic array of essays, and I really appreciated that. It was such a well-rounded collection. One essay would just talk about the incredible amount of pain and loss and grief she experienced as a child, and then the next story would be about her bowel movements with IBS and the different types of poop she has, and like it was just very open. And the next one would talk about the different types of sex positions she's into. Like it was just such a wide array. It was so open. It was very I guess I'll say the word vulgar. It was very candid and raw and open, so like that can definitely be interpreted as vulgar. She curses a lot. She talks a lot about, like I said, bodily excrements, and she talks a lot about her relationships, her romantic life, and all of that stuff. But overall, it was just a really, really fun collection. It was deeply moving, but it also just made me laugh so much, and I really needed that. And I highly, highly recommend the audiobook version because Samantha narrates it herself, and she has a fantastic delivery, and her voice is perfect for this, reading her own stories, because it is just so funny. It feels like you're listening to a comedy set, and I just really recommend it, and I'm so excited to read more of Samantha Irby's books. But because it is like a memoir, I kind of categorize this more as memoirs than essays. I decided not to give it a rating, but I highly recommend this one. Overall, I just really enjoyed this essay collection. Okay, the next book that I read was such a delightful treat. This is a book that I've been looking forward to reading for a long time, but had never read it prior to this, and I knew I needed to read it, and that was Matilda by Roald Dahl. This was so much fun. I'm sure majority of you are familiar with Matilda, but if you're not, this is a YA kind of middle grade book. We have these cute little illustrations in here by Roald Dahl, and it follows this young girl named Matilda as she's growing up in a family that really doesn't care about her. She doesn't really fit in. She loves reading. She finally gets to go to school, and she's so excited to go to school, and then there's this horrible headmistress who just makes her life like a living hell. Then there's some, magical things that happen, and Matilda has some like superpowers. It is just a really funny, really charming, really cute book. I'm so happy I read it, and right after I watched the movie, which I had also never seen ever in my life. So it was just a really fun experience. It was one that I'm so happy that now I can like check off on my list of books that I need to read in my lifetime. This is such a classic. So many people love this book. I really wish I read it when I was younger, but I'm so glad that I've read it now, and I'm really happy, and I highly recommend it. You don't have to be young to read and appreciate this book. Like, if you want to read it, I recommend that you do so because it was fantastic. Okay, this next book I have talked about so much already, so I'll keep this one brief, but if you want to hear more thoughts and watch me talk about it as I'm reading it, I will link one of my vlogs down below. At the beginning of that vlog, I was reading Matilda, but then I picked up this book, so if you want to learn more, I highly recommend watching reading vlogs, as well as subscribe, because when I do reading vlogs, I talk a lot more in depth about the books that I'm reading, what I like about it, certain scenes. I like to read out loud certain portions that I really enjoy. So if you're interested in hearing more in-depth information about these books, I highly recommend you check out those vlogs. This book, and I found it at a thrift store for 50 cents, which blows my mind, but that is The Truth About Awiti by C.P. Patrick. Oh my gosh! This was phenomenal. I don't know what it was specifically about this month and kind of reading books that were just so unique. I feel like they are stories that need and deserve more hype. They're stories that were just like from completely different and new perspectives. They really challenged and changed the way I thought and would think and interpret stories and books. The Truth About Awiti is a historical fiction fantasy that follows Awiti, who was born in the 15th century in Africa. She had a really difficult childhood, and she finds herself becoming immortal. I won't share how that happens, but she becomes immortal. She becomes this immortal person who then helps the next hundreds of years of slaves get redemption and revenge by killing their white slave masters and their generations of descendants. And she does this by poisoning them, by causing storms that brew. And what's so interesting is that this book originates from this ghost story folklore that the spirits of slaves cause hurricanes and storms. So most storms originate off of the coast of Africa. They travel across the transatlantic, which is the same route that they took as slaves in the ships, the transatlantic slave trade, and then they these storms hit and have the hardest impact on the U.S. South, in the southern states that were Confederate, and where a lot of these slaves ended up being and living for the rest of their lives. So this book is based on that, how Awiti then has the power to summon these storms and really gather all of her force and her energy for revenge and redemption against these white slave owners and slave trades. But what makes this book even more I mean, can it be even more? But like even more intriguing and amazing is how well this book is written. I cannot express to you all how incredibly well done this book is, how well written it is. But each chapter bounces from a different year and a different place and from a different perspective. And all of the perspectives have one thing in common, and that is they meet Awiti, or they are friends with Awiti. And it's like, even if they don't describe her by name, you know they're talking about Awiti, and they're talking about how she is leading this revolution, and she's this trying to free the slaves, and she's this abolitionist, and she's like really powerful and strong, and like, but even if you're not reading from Awiti's perspective, you have so much knowledge of her, and you can see where and how she bounces all over the world to try and help as many slaves as she possibly can. So 5 stars. This was so incredible. I will hype this book up forever. It was such an incredible book. It was such an incredible story. The storytelling was masterful. 5 stars forever. I will be talking about this one and recommending it for the rest of my life. Incredible. Okay, this next book I found at Dollar Tree not too long ago, and I knew I wanted to read it pretty soon because it is this hefty graphic novel, and that is The Sculptor by Scott McCloud. It has this gorgeous blue spine, this beautiful illustration on the back as well, and this is this really cool blue, black, and white graphic novel that follows this young man who is a sculptor, and he makes a deal with time or death, kind of like this being, that if he's able to become the best sculptor ever and he's able to utilize his talents to his fullest capacity and fullest potential, he will give death his life in X amount of days. I believe it's like 280 days or something like that. So he takes it. So he's able to create sculptures with his bare hands out of like any material, concrete, iron, metal, literally anything he can bend and form and mold with his bare hands. So that's what the gift was that he is able to sculpt in whatever he wants without materials ever really being an issue. All he really wanted was just this sense of he's making a difference in the world through art. It wasn't necessarily about being successful or the notoriety of being an artist, but it was just that feeling of like needing to be appreciated and needing to have positively affected the art community, which is something that like any artist feels. You want to feel like you have impacted the art world, you've changed the status quo of art, you've made people think or realize or change perspectives. But then of course a romance happens. And he's like, oh shit, I don't want to die anymore, JK, JK, JK. It was really beautiful. It was really sad. I think the conversation that it had about art versus love reminded me a lot of like the dilemma in like La La Land. Like, do you choose your art and your craft, or do you choose building a life with somebody that you love? And which are you willing to sacrifice? It was just a really wonderful graphic novel. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really beautiful. The only thing I didn't like though was the ending. The ending was like really beautiful at first, and then like the last line, like I still remember the last line, which is pretty rare for me, I feel like. I only remember the last line if it really hits me powerfully and emotionally, or if it was like that where I was like, oh. This is, as well, I should say too, this is definitely more of an adult graphic novel. It does reference more explicit content. But overall, I gave this book 3 stars, which means that I really did enjoy it. It just didn't have like a huge impact on me. It's not one that I really thought about once I finished it. It was a wonderful experience while reading it, let me tell you. Like, I was flying through, I was having so much fun with it. But when it ended, I just kind of like didn't really think about it again. So 3 stars. That is The Sculptor. Okay, this next book I found at an estate sale warehouse a while ago for like 20 cents. And when I looked it up on Goodreads, it only had 2 reviews and both of them were 2 stars. So I was like, hell yes, let's take it. I want to read this for myself because like no one's really read this book. And no one likes it, apparently. And that is Window on the Seine by Frances Y. McHugh. And this was so bizarre. This was such a weird book, and I really liked it for how weird it was. Like, Frances Y. McHugh just like went out of their way to create like a super bizarre story and then like didn't really want to explain why it was bizarre. And I was like, kudos. It takes place in 1869. We're following our main character named Anna, and Anna has moved from Philadelphia to Paris to accompany her brother as he is on a work trip. She then meets a young European man. They fall in love. His name is Edward, and Edward's like, yo, I'm not gonna ask to marry you yet because I'm gonna go to Egypt soon and work on the Suez Canal and like opening it, so I can't commit to you right now, but like just know that I love you and I do want to marry you, so you should stay in Paris. You should stay with my sister who lives in Paris with her husband and their kid. So Anna does just that. She moves in, and Edward's sister's husband is very unfaithful. He has a lot of affairs, and his wife is aware of it. And then their son has this really creepy nanny who is definitely like, sketchy things are happening with this nanny. You feel it immediately. There's some tension going on. And it just follows Anna as she like, I don't know, man. It's so weird. Like, paranormal stuff starts happening in the house, but there's all this like political turmoil and intrigue. You know, the Parisians and the Germans aren't getting along well right now. Like, things are really tense. And then Anna has to flee the country. Like, it was all over the place, but the writing style was like so easy to read, and it was just a linear story. Nothing was ever explained. It was just like, all of this is just happening, and like don't really question it, like this is just what's happening now. And I don't know, I had a lot of fun with it. Like I honestly never had a clue where this book was going, and I really appreciated that. This was written in 1969, and I don't know, I just had a lot of fun with it. It was really freaking bizarre. It really took me by surprise because I really did end up enjoying it while I was reading it. I just had a lot of fun with it. So that is Window on the Seine. This next book made me really sad because I received it for my birthday from my wonderful partner. I was super geeked out to read this book, and I've been wanting to read it for years, but then when I read it, I was so disappointed. That book is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. I'm so sad and mad that I didn't like this book, but I just didn't. I just really didn't. And I have valid reasons why I didn't. And again, I did talk about this in my birthday vlog, so if you want to hear some longer thoughts, I definitely recommend checking out that birthday vlog, and if you want to skip ahead to when I'm talking about it, it's at the very end of that video. Anyway, so Howl's Moving Castle, I feel like a lot of us know what it's about, but in case you don't, we're following this young woman named Sophie who feels a little stuck in her life. She doesn't really have any passions, she doesn't have anything. She's then cursed by the Wicked Witch of the Waste to appear to be 80 years old. So she is just now 80 years old. She's not able to tell anybody that she was cursed, so people just assume that she really is 80 years old. So she decides to flee her home. She doesn't want to worry her family, and she just goes and she runs into Howl's Moving Castle, which is a legit castle that moves, and she befriends Howl, this fire demon named Calcifer, and this young apprentice named Michael, and they live together, and she becomes their house cleaner. So that's basically the premise. More things happen than that, but that's like the basic plot. But Howl is this famous wizard, and he's this complicated kind of narcissistic guy. There are a lot of rumors about him that he eats women's hearts, but only beautiful women. And Sophie has like this really awesome personality where she's just really persnickety, but I did have a lot of issues with this book, and it was just mainly because there was a really big time twist in this that I was not anticipating and I had never heard anyone really talk about. I am nervous that it is a little bit of a spoiler, so in this video I will not be talking about it, but I do talk about it in my vlog. So if you are interested, please check it out down below if you want to hear my thoughts about this time twist. And if you've read Howl's Moving Castle and know what I'm talking about, let me know down below. And let me know how you felt about it, because for me, it really took me out of the magic of the book. It made me not trust any of the characters. It made me not trust the world that we're in, because obviously this is kind of like a YA middle grade fantasy. So I was just really disappointed in this one. I would love to try it again in another 5-10 years or so. I'll definitely be keeping this copy so I can reread it. Knowing what I know now, maybe I'll enjoy it more. But because I was so taken aback by that, I'm a little nervous and hesitant. However, though, I did receive the sequel to this book as well for my birthday by my partner, so I am really curious to read that and see if anything is really disclosed or talked about, because I just didn't like how certain things were brought up and then never explained. Specifically because it's a fantasy book and it's in its own world that I feel like needs to be a little bit more intentional, whereas Window on the Seine takes place in reality, real world. It's kind of a historical fiction, and then just like crazy things would happen. Are they completely legitimate things that could happen? They probably could. Are they still really weird? Yes. Whereas this is a fantasy book, and I feel like if you're gonna do weird things, I need a reason why. We just weren't really given that. Like, things just felt like they weren't really intentional. Things felt like they weren't urgent. It didn't really feel like there was much of tension or plot or conflict until the very end, and then it was just like, whoa, 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 slow down. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? So anyway, I ended up giving this book 3 stars. I was really sad that I didn't enjoy it more, but again, like, I'm not giving up all hope and love for this book. I know that so many people consider this one of their favorite books of all time, and that's like a cozy, comforting read to them. So hopefully one day I can revisit it, or I can read the sequel and hopefully get some further context. So I gave 3 stars to Howl's Moving Castle. The next book that I read was actually a play that I found while thrifting in my Thrift With Me video, which I will link down below if you're interested, and that is A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry. This is a really cute, small little play that was originally published in the 1950s, and this play has so much historic significance because it was a really big, popular, successful play written by a Black woman in the 1950s. And this play follows a Black family living in Chicago as they are dealing with kind of outgrowing the home they're currently in, having bigger dreams of like doing more, being more successful, living in a bigger home, and all of the really difficult, horrible things that prevent them from being able to do so. And that is mainly due to the fact that they are Black and the discriminations and injustices and the lack of opportunity that they're given as a family. What I loved, I think, the most about this was the character Beneatha, and this was like before the 60s and 70s and modern day. Like, Beneatha was like a feminist, and she decided to let her hair grow naturally and stop relaxing it, and she became really interested in the different African cultures and traditions and wanting to bring the family away from assimilating and kind of calling her family assimilators and wanting to embrace her Black culture and Black heritage. This play broke my heart. The last scene really broke my heart. It was funny, it was heartbreaking, it was so interactive, and other than Shakespeare, this is my first play that I've ever read, and I definitely would love to read more because it was so perfectly done. I just can't believe I'd never heard of it before either, which is pretty upsetting, but I think this should be required reading in schools. It was really easy to understand, it was very emotional, it was beautiful. I would love to see the play format, like reading it as the play really just made it feel like a movie experience in my head. It just goes to show like what talented writing it was. So I ended up giving 4 stars to A Raisin in the Sun. The last audiobook I listened to in the month of April was Burn the Place, a memoir by Elena Regan. This is a memoir by Elena, who is a chef. I'm not sure how many Michelin stars her restaurant has, but I know it's probably a few now, and she is like quite a famous chef. I picked it maybe quite obviously to some of you because of the cover. The cover is stunning, it is beautiful, but in this memoir, Elena talks about her childhood kind of foraging for mushrooms, being outside all the time, being with her family all the time. She had a lot of sisters. Talks about like the grief and trauma and loss of family and childhood. Very sad and difficult topics. Definitely trigger warnings for this book. She does talk about her addiction and her struggle with alcoholism. A lot of reminiscing on situations she found herself in while being drunk and blacked out. It also very openly talked about her sexuality as a lesbian and her kind of realizing it at a younger age, not really wanting to identify it, not really want to say she's a lesbian. Like, it just kind of was who she was, and she didn't quite understand like why it had to be like categorized as something. So it just talked about her personality, talked about, beautifully describes the food that she creates and how she came up with them, the hours and hours and hours of research and studying and almost like scientific experiments needed to create the perfect dish or to create the perfect loaf of bread. It was just really beautiful. It was really well done. I think it was a really enjoyable memoir overall. It wasn't my favorite memoir of all time, but it was one that I definitely recommend, especially if you like reading about food, and that's something that I just really love. She also was somebody who started doing farm-to-table restaurants and dining and food before it was really big. It was just something that she always did when she was younger, was just like find her own materials and ingredients out in the woods and stuff. So it was just really interesting to hear her talk about the trends of food as well. So overall, I really enjoyed this memoir, and maybe one day I can add it to my bucket list to go visit one of her restaurants because it made me very hungry. It made my mouth water. So there is that book. Okay, friends, we have made it. This is the last friggin' book out of the 13 books that I read in April. This is a lot. This one is really out of character for me, and I need to say that first off. This book is probably the most out of character for me ever since starting this booktube channel. I saw it at Dollar Tree, and for some reason I was just really pulled to it, and I was like, don't fight the pull, like just buy it, it's $1. And the reason it's so out of character for me is because it's a fantasy. And not only is it a fantasy, it is also the first book of a trilogy. I also don't read series. The book I picked up is Moon Chosen by PC Cast. First off, this holographic cover is stunning. It's so beautiful. I don't know if you're able to see it from here, but there is this like really cool like wolf dog on the cover. And this is part of the trilogy Tales of a New World. I don't know, I think it was just because this is like a really big chunky paperback that intrigued me about it. There's something about really chunky paperbacks that I just really love. I want to like immediately immerse myself in this world. I want to get lost in its pages and just like, you know what I mean? Just really like get in there. This was like my first adult fantasy. So what really intrigued me about this book at first was how much the world, this fantasy world that we're following, has to do with nature and earth. I really like reading about natural elements and being out in nature in the woods. This follows this young girl named Mari who is 18 and her mother is the Moon Woman, and she belongs to this tribe called the Earth Walkers. And for them, they gather all of their energy and their power through the moon. The Earth Walkers have then been enslaved and have been enslaved for a long time by this tribe that lives in the trees called the Tribe of the Trees, and they're also called companions. And these people who live in the trees, they raise dogs, and the dogs at a very young age pick their companion and they are bonded for the rest of their lives. So there's this war kind of going on between the Earth Walkers and the companions, and this fantastical world just kind of like gets the ball rolling. And Mari has a secret, which I'm not going to disclose because I thought it was like really cool, and it's introduced really early in the book. What's interesting about this book, and maybe it's just because I'm such a newbie to adult fantasy, is that majority of this book is dialogue. So right from the get, it's like we're building the world through dialogue, which honestly to me felt super cheesy. It felt really cringy, it felt really awkward. Like it just feels really unnatural to like open in on a mother-daughter scene and the daughter is like, "Mother, tell me the story again of how I was born or why our clans don't like each other." And the mother is like, "Oh, daughter, I have told you this for the past 18 winters." So then you know she's 18 years old. And she's like, "But I will tell it again." And she tells the story. And I'm like, that's just so cringy to me. I don't know why, but it's just so like, your mother-daughter. Like, I know you're only doing this because I'm here and I'm reading the book. But at the same time, I really appreciated that majority of this really big book that is almost 600 pages went by really, really, really fast for me because majority of it and the world building was all through dialogue. It was really fast-paced. It was really fun. I was never bored while reading this. So much happens really quickly, and I thought that the build-up to scenes were great. I thought the pacing of the book was great. So for somebody who's a complete newbie to the genre, I really enjoyed this. I had so much fun. I really enjoyed it, and I think I do want to read the next 2 books in this trilogy. I don't know when or when I'll get my hands on those copies, but I think it's something I am really interested in reading more from. So let me know down below if you've read from this series before, Tales of a New World trilogy. I would love to hear your thoughts if you've read the whole thing, if it's worth it. Don't spoil anything, but I am curious. So that is Moon Chosen. There we have it, my friends. These are the 13 books that I read in the month of April. It was a very successful reading month. So thank you all so incredibly much for being here, for joining along, for listening to me rant and review and talk chit-chat about all of these books. I would love to hear what you read in April and if you had any special favorite books of the month or least favorite books of the month, as well as what you're reading this month in May. Thank you all again so much. I appreciate you all. I hope wherever you are, you're doing really, really well. I will see you all very soon. Stay cozy, my friends. Bye!